The autumn wind carried the scent of pine and distant snow as Jed Halverson guided his horse down the mountain trail toward Cedar Ridge. He hadn't set foot in the small mining town for near 3 months, and wouldn't be here now if not for the dwindling supplies in his cabin. Salt, flour, coffee, the bare necessities that even a man who'd chosen solitude couldn't do without. At 42, Jed cut an imposing figure against the backdrop of yellowing aspens. His beard, once coal-black, now showed threads of silver that caught the late afternoon sun. Broad shoulders filled out a worn buckskin jacket, and his hands, scarred from years of trapping and working the unforgiving land, held the reins with practiced ease. Those who knew him before Sarah died of the fever 6 winters past, said he'd aged a decade in that first year alone. Now, most folks in Cedar Ridge had forgotten what his smile looked like. The town appeared around a bend, its collection of rough-hewn buildings huddled against the mountainside like sheep seeking shelter. Smoke rose from chimneys, and the distant ring of a blacksmith's hammer echoed off the canyon walls. Jed pulled his hat lower, hoping to complete his business without the burden of conversation. But as he approached the general store, an unusual commotion drew his attention. A crowd had gathered near the town square, mostly men, their voices carrying a mix of amusement and something darker. Jed meant to ride past, but his horse, sensing his rider's hesitation, slowed to a walk. "Come on, gentlemen," a voice rose above the murmur. "Surely someone here needs a woman about the house. She's strong as an ox and twice as useful." The speaker stood on a makeshift platform, really just some planks laid across 2 barrels. Howard Briggs, if Jed's memory served. A man who dealt in cattle, horses, and apparently today, something else entirely. Beside him, a figure stood motionless. A grain sack pulled over their head, hands bound in front. "She ain't much to look at," Briggs continued, his laugh sharp as breaking glass. "But she'll work hard. Can't promise she'll be pleasant company, but for the right price, that's your problem to sort out." The crowd shifted uneasily. Some men laughed, others looked away. A few women on the street's edges pulled their shawls tighter and hurried past, disgust clear on their faces. "What's her story?" someone called out. Briggs spat tobacco juice off the platform. "Let's call her a mistake that needs correcting. Previous arrangement didn't work out. Man who had claimed to her decided she wasn't worth the trouble. Too wild, he said. Peculiar, but one man's trash." He let the ugly saying hang in the air. The figure under the sack stood straighter at his words, shoulders squaring despite the humiliation. Something about that small gesture of defiance caught Jed's attention and held it. $5, someone shouted, more in jest than serious offer. $5 for a woman who can work dawn to dusk? You insult me, sir. She might be homely as a mud fence, but she's got a strong back. Then why the sack, Briggs? Another voice, skeptical. If she can work so good, let's see what we're buying. Terms of sale, Briggs said quickly. Previous owner insisted. Said it's better for everyone this way. Trust me, gentlemen. You're not buying her for her pretty face. The laughter that followed made something twist in Jed's gut. He'd seen plenty of cruelty in his years, but this, selling a woman like livestock, keeping her hooded like some shameful secret, it rankled him in ways he couldn't quite name. $3, someone offered half-heartedly. $2, countered another. And that's generous for damaged goods. The woman's hands clenched into fists. Even from his distance, Jed could see the white of her knuckles. The tremor that might have been rage or fear, or both. "Gentlemen, please," Briggs was growing frustrated. "She's a Christian woman, knows her letters, can cook and keep house. If she's so accomplished, why's she here?" The blacksmith, Samuel Morrison, had joined the crowd, his leather apron still dirty from work. He was one of the few decent men in Cedar Ridge, and his tone carried disapproval. "This ain't right, Briggs, and you know it. Right or wrong ain't my concern," Briggs shot back. "I'm just facilitating a transaction, legal and proper, with papers to prove it." He waved a document in the air. "Now, do I have any serious offers, or do I take her to the next town?" The crowd began to disperse, interest waning. Some muttered about the impropriety of it all. Others made crude jokes that carried on the wind. The woman on the platform swayed slightly, and Jed wondered how long she'd been standing there, displayed like goods in a shop window. Going once, Briggs called out, desperation creeping into his voice. Going twice? $10. The words came from Jed's mouth before he'd made any conscious decision to speak. The crowd turned, surprised to see the mountain man who rarely spoke to anyone, let alone involved himself in town affairs. Briggs's eyes lit up with relief and greed. $10 for Mr. Halverson. Now that's more like it. Do I hear 15? Silence stretched across the square. Men who moments before had been joking now studied their boots or found urgent business elsewhere. Sold. Briggs brought his fist down on his palm. To Jed Halverson for $10. Come collect your purchase, sir. Jed dismounted slowly, his movements deliberate. He pulled the money from his coat, most of what he'd brought for supplies, and climbed the platform steps. Up close, he could see the woman was tall, nearly matching his own height. The rough sack obscured her features, but her posture spoke volumes. Despite everything, she stood with a dignity that circumstances couldn't strip away. The papers, Jed said quietly. Briggs handed over the document with obvious relief. She's all yours. Good luck with her. You'll need it. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. Word of advice, keep the sack on till you're well clear of town. Trust me on that. Jed ignored him, turning instead to the woman. Ma'am, he said, his voice rusty from disuse. Can you ride? A small nod. My horse is just there. We'll be leaving now. He reached for her elbow to guide her, but she pulled back sharply. After a moment, she extended her bound hands toward him instead. The message was clear. She'd go, but on her own terms. Jed respected that. He untied the rope around her wrists, noting the raw marks beneath. They descended the platform together, the crowd parting before them. Some stared openly, others whispered behind raised hands. Jed helped her mount his horse, then swung up behind her. She sat rigid as a fence post, but didn't protest the necessity of his arms around her to hold the reins. As they rode out of Cedar Ridge, Jed heard Briggs call out one last time. Remember, Halverson, no returns. She's your problem now. The words followed them up the mountain trail, ugly as buzzards circling carrion. But with each mile that passed, each step taking them deeper into the wilderness that was Jed's domain, the tension in the woman's shoulders eased fractionally. The sun was bleeding orange across the peaks when she finally spoke, her voice muffled by the sack but clear enough. Why? Jed considered the question as their horse picked its way along a creek bed. Why indeed? He could have bought his supplies and returned to his solitude. Could have let another man claim her, or let Briggs drag her to the next town to repeat the shameful spectacle. Didn't seem right, he said finally. Nobody deserves that. She was quiet for so long he thought the conversation was over. Then, you don't know what you've bought. Didn't buy anything, Jed corrected. Just paid to get you away from that circus. Another long silence. Then, so soft he almost missed it. Thank you. They rode on as darkness gathered in the hollows and valleys below. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, lonely and wild. The woman didn't flinch at the sound. If anything, she seemed to relax further, as if the wilderness was less threatening than the civilization they'd left behind. Jed found himself wondering what story the sack hid, what had brought her to that platform in Cedar Ridge. But questions could wait. For now, it was enough that she was away from grasping hands and cruel laughter, riding toward a place where the mountains kept their own counsel, and a person could breathe free. Whatever tomorrow brought, it had to be better than today. The trail wound higher into the mountains, leaving the last traces of Cedar Ridge far below. Night had fully claimed the sky, but Jed knew these paths like the lines on his own palms. The horse moved steady and sure-footed beneath them, guided by instinct and familiarity through stands of pine and aspen. The woman hadn't spoken again since her quiet thanks. She sat still as stone in front of him, but Jed noticed things, small details that told their own story. Her hands, now free, were indeed large for a woman's, with calluses that spoke of hard work. Her shoulders were broad beneath the rough fabric of her dress, and she held herself with the kind of strength that came from years of physical labor, not the delicate posture of a pampered lady. Most telling was her calm. No tears, no pleas, no hysteria. Just that eerie stillness, as if she'd retreated somewhere deep inside herself where humiliation and fear couldn't reach. Jed had seen that kind of stillness before, in wounded animals and broken men. It was the quiet of someone who'd learned that showing weakness only invited more cruelty. The moon rose full and bright, casting silver light through the forest canopy. They'd been riding for near 3 hours when Jed finally caught sight of his cabin, a dark shape against the tree line with a thin tendril of smoke still rising from the chimney, the last remnants of the morning's fire. "We're here," he said, the first words either had spoken in miles. She stirred slightly, tilting her head as if trying to see through the sack. Jed dismounted first, then reached up to help her down. She accepted his assistance this time, though her movements were stiff from the long ride. The cabin wasn't much to look at, a single room built of logs chinked with mud. A stone chimney at one end, a lean-to for the horse attached to the side. But it was solid and weather-tight, and it had been home for 6 years now. Jed led the woman to the door, fumbling with the latch in the darkness. Inside, he lit a kerosene lamp, warm light spilling across the sparse furnishings. A bed in one corner, a table with 2 chairs, shelves lined with preserves and dry goods, his rifle mounted above the fireplace. Everything neat and orderly. The habit of a man with too much time and too little company. The woman stood just inside the doorway, her head turning slowly as if taking in the space through the coarse weave of the grain sack. "You can sit," Jed said, gesturing to a chair. "I'll get the fire going." She moved carefully to the table and sat, her hands folded in her lap. Jed busied himself with kindling and logs, soon coaxing flames to life in the hearth. The warmth began to chase away the mountain chill, and he noticed her shoulders drop slightly as the heat reached her. He filled a tin cup with water from the bucket by the door, set it on the table near her hands. "You must be thirsty." She reached for it, paused. "The sack." "I'll take it off," Jed said. "If you're willing." A long moment passed. Then she nodded. Jed moved behind her, found where the sack was tied with rough twine around her neck. His fingers worked at the knots, careful not to pull her hair. The twine fell away, and he lifted the sack gently. The lamplight revealed her face in stages. First the strong jaw, then the high cheekbones, the straight nose. Her hair, dark auburn threaded with premature silver, had been roughly shorn at some point, leaving it uneven and barely reaching her shoulders. But it was her eyes that made Jed's breath catch. One was deep brown, warm as good earth. The other was pale green, the color of winter ice, and running from her left temple down across her cheek was a scar, old but prominent, a pale line that spoke of some past violence. She wasn't beautiful in the conventional sense. Her features were too strong, too angular for traditional prettiness, but there was something magnificent about her face, like a mountain cliff or a storm sky, powerful and uncompromising. He understood now why they'd kept her hooded, not because she was hideous, but because she was memorable, unforgettable, the kind of woman whose face would haunt a man, make him question what beauty really meant. She watched him steadily with those mismatched eyes, waiting for the reaction she'd clearly seen too many times before. The disgust, the fear, the cruel words. Instead, Jed simply said, "The water's fresh. Brought it up from the spring this morning." Something flickered across her features, surprise, perhaps. She lifted the cup and drank deeply, and he noticed her hands trembled slightly. "Are you hungry? I've got some stew I can warm." Her voice was hoarse from disuse. She cleared her throat, tried again. "I don't want to be trouble." "No trouble. I need to eat anyway." He moved to the hearth, ladling cold stew from an iron pot into a smaller vessel to warm. The familiar motions of preparing food gave him something to do with his hands, while his mind worked through the strangeness of having another person in his space. "My name is Mara," she said suddenly. "Just Mara. No family name worth claiming anymore." "Jed Halvorsen," he replied, though she likely already knew from the auction. "Been living up here 6 years now." "Alone?" "Alone." He stirred the stew, not elaborating on the why of it. That story could keep. "And now you have—" She paused, searching for the right word. "What am I to you, Mr. Halvorsen? You paid money. You have papers." Jed considered his answer carefully. "Far as I'm concerned, you're a guest who needed help getting out of a bad situation. Nothing more, nothing less." Guests can leave when they choose. So can you. He turned from the fire to meet her eyes. Come morning. If you want to go, I'll take you wherever you need to be. Give you what supplies I can spare. That paper Briggs gave me, we can burn it right now if you like. Mara studied him with those striking eyes, searching for the trap, the lie. Why would you do that? You paid $10. That's not nothing to a man living simple. Money's just money. Jed shrugged. Can always trap more furs, pan more gold. Can't always live with yourself if you stand by and watch wrong being done. The stew was warm now. He ladled it into 2 bowls, set one before her with a spoon. She looked at it like it might disappear if she reached for it too quick. Go on, he urged. It's not fancy, but it'll fill your belly. She ate slowly at first, then with increasing hunger. Jed realized she probably hadn't had a proper meal in days. He kept his own eating quiet, not wanting to shame her with attention. When her bowl was empty, he refilled it without asking. This time, she ate more slowly, savoring rather than simply filling the void. I know what they told you, she said between spoonfuls. That I'm difficult, peculiar, unfit for decent company. Men say a lot of things. Doesn't make them true. Sometimes it does. She set down her spoon, fixed him with that dual-colored gaze. I fought back. That was my crime. Refused to bend knee to a man who thought buying a woman's labor meant owning her soul. So they labeled me wild, unmarriageable, a cautionary tale for other women who might think to resist. The fire crackled in the silence that followed. Jed recognized the weight of her words, the trust it took to speak them to a stranger. Sounds to me like you've got sense and spine, he said finally. Nothing wrong with either. A ghost of a smile touched her lips, the first he'd seen. It transformed her face, softening the harsh angles, making her eyes bright despite their different colors. You're either very kind or very foolish, Mr. Halverson. Been called both. Truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. He stood, gathering the empty bowls. You'll take the bed tonight. I'll make a pallet by the fire. I couldn't. You could and you will. You've had a hard enough day without adding a sore back to your troubles. She rose from the table, moved toward the bed, then stopped. The previous owner, the one who... He'll come looking. He's not the sort to let go of what he considers his, even if he doesn't want it anymore. Let him come. Jed's voice carried the quiet confidence of a man who'd faced down bears and mountain cats. This is my land, my home. Nobody takes anything from here that I don't allow. Mara nodded slowly, some tension easing from her frame. She sat on the edge of the bed, testing its give. It's been a very long time since anyone showed me kindness without expecting payment. No payment needed. Just get some rest. Tomorrow's problems can wait for tomorrow. He busied himself preparing his own sleeping space, pulling out an old bearskin and some wool blankets. When he looked back, she'd lain down fully clothed, curled on her side facing the wall, protecting herself even in sleep. Jed banked the fire for the night and stretched out on his makeshift bed. Above, wind moved through the pines with a sound like whispered secrets. He thought about the strangeness of the day, riding down for supplies, coming back with a person. A woman with mismatched eyes and too many scars, both visible and hidden. He'd told her she was a guest, free to leave come morning. But something in her stillness, her careful words, made him suspect she had nowhere else to go. Well, that was fine. The mountain had room enough for 2 broken souls trying to find their way back to whole. As sleep finally claimed him, Jed's last thought was of that brief smile, how it had lit up her face like sunrise after a long, dark night. Maybe, just maybe, they could help each other remember what it felt like to not be alone. The fire settled into embers, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, an owl called through the darkness, and the ancient mountains kept their silent watch over the small cabin and its unexpected occupants. The first week passed in careful rhythms. Mara rose with the dawn, moving about the cabin quiet as a shadow while Jed went about his morning chores. She insisted on earning her keep, cooking, mending, organizing supplies with an efficiency that spoke of years managing a household. But she did it all without the subservience he might have expected. Instead, she worked like a partner, anticipating needs without being asked, improving systems without seeking permission. Jed found himself adjusting to her presence in unexpected ways. The cabin felt less empty, the silence less oppressive. She didn't fill it with chatter. Mara was economical with words, but her movements created a companionable backdrop to his days. The scratch of her knife preparing vegetables, the whisper of thread through fabric as she repaired his worn shirts, the soft tread of her boots on the plank floor. It was the 8th night when she finally began to tell her story. They sat by the fire after supper, Jed working oil into his traps while Mara darned socks. The domesticity of it might have been amusing if not for the weight that still hung in the air between them. Questions unasked, truths untold. His name was Garrett Walsh, she said suddenly, not looking up from her needlework. The man who owned the ranch, my previous situation. Jed's hands stilled on the trap, but he didn't interrupt. My father owed him money, gambling debts. When he couldn't pay, Walsh offered a solution. Me, not as a wife, mind you. That would have required treating me as something approaching equal. No, I was to be his housekeeper. Permanently indentured, you might say. Her voice carried bitter humor. Father agreed before I even knew of the arrangement. The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, wind rattled the windows. I tried to make it work, she continued. Kept his house, cooked his meals, managed his servants. For 2 years I did everything asked of me, but it wasn't enough. He wanted— She paused, choosing her words carefully. He wanted submission, complete and absolute. Wanted me grateful for the roof over my head, bowing and scraping for every scrap of food. When I maintained my dignity, refused to grovel, he took it as defiance. The scar? Jed asked quietly. Her hand rose unconsciously to her face. His ring, backhanded me when I refused to kneel and beg forgiveness for burning his breakfast. Said he'd teach me proper humility. A harsh laugh escaped her. Instead, it taught me I'd rather die on my feet than live on my knees. So you fought back. I did. Threw a pot of hot coffee in his face and ran. Made it 3 days in the wilderness before his men caught me. The things they said he'd do. She shuddered. But Walsh was smarter than that. He knew killing me would raise questions, might even bring law into it. So he found another way to punish me. Her needle moved steadily through the wool, each stitch precise despite the tremor in her voice. He spread word that I was mad, dangerous, unnatural, said my different-colored eyes were the mark of witchcraft, that I'd tried to poison him. In a God-fearing community, such accusations carry weight. No one would hire me, shelter me, even speak to me. I became a pariah overnight. But you escaped again. Eventually. Lived rough for months doing whatever work I could find where people didn't know my face. But Walsh had reach. Every time I started to build something, word would find me. Finally, he decided on a final solution. Sell me off to whoever would take me, far enough away that I'd never trouble him again. She set down the darning, finally meeting Jed's eyes. That's what you bought, Mr. Halverson. A woman labeled mad and dangerous, marked by the devil himself according to some. A woman who chose defiance over safety, pride over survival. Many would say I brought my troubles on myself. Jed studied her face in the firelight, the strong features, the striking eyes, the scar that told its own story of survival. What I see, he said slowly, is a woman who refused to let a cruel man break her spirit. Nothing mad about that. As for dangerous, he allowed himself a small smile. Well, I reckon a little danger keeps life interesting. You're not afraid of what people might say, what they might think. Mara, I live alone on a mountain. Haven't cared for others' opinions in years. He set aside the trap, leaning back in his chair. Besides, I've known truly dangerous folk. You don't qualify. How can you be sure? Because dangerous people don't warn you about their nature. They don't sit quiet by the fire darning socks. They sure don't look guilty when they take an extra biscuit at breakfast thinking no one's watching. A flush crept up her neck. You saw that. Course I did. Also saw you sneak half your portion to that mangy fox that's been hanging around. Soft heart for creatures in need. Another sure sign of a dangerous woman. For the second time since he'd known her, Mara smiled. Fuller this time, transforming her face completely. You're mocking me. Maybe a little. He grew serious again. But I mean what I say. You're welcome here, Mara, long as you want to stay." She was quiet for a long moment, watching the flames dance. "There's something else. The reason I can never truly be free of him." Jed waited, patient as the mountains themselves. "I have a sister, Eliza. She's only 17. The words came harder now, pulled from some deep place of pain. "When I fled, Walsh kept her. Insurance, he called it. As long as he has her, he knows I'll never go to the law, never speak publicly about what happened. She's not strong like me. Gentle, trusting. The kind of person the world breaks without trying. He's holding her prisoner. Not in chains, no, but she can't leave, has no money, nowhere to go. He tells people she's simple-minded, needs caring for. And Eliza, she believes what she's told, believes she's fortunate to have a roof over her head, that she's too weak to survive on her own." Tears gathered in her eyes, the first Jed had seen. "I abandoned her, left her there to save myself. You didn't abandon her. You survived so you could fight another day." "Pretty words, Mr. Halverson, but they don't change the truth. Every night she's there, I'm here. Every moment of freedom I have is bought with her captivity." The weight of her confession settled over the cabin like heavy snow. Jed understood now the true chains that bound her. Not legal documents or social shame, but love and guilt twisted together into an unbreakable cord. "We'll get her out," he said simply. Mara's head snapped up. "What?" "Your sister. We'll find a way to get her free. Might take time, planning, but mountains aren't moved in a day. You don't understand. Walsh has money, men, influence. You're one man with a cabin and some traps. It's impossible. I've got more than that. Got knowledge of this land that his men don't. Got friends among the trappers and miners who remember what I did for them over the years. Got patience to wait for the right moment." He leaned forward, meeting her mismatched gaze steadily. "And now I've got someone who knows his weaknesses, his patterns. That's not nothing." "Why?" The question came out cracked, desperate. "Why would you risk so much for strangers?" Jed was quiet for a moment, organizing thoughts he rarely examined. "Lost my wife 6 years back. Fever took her, nothing I could do but watch. Spent every year since telling myself I was content alone, that I didn't need anybody. Maybe that was true, maybe it wasn't. But sitting here now, hearing your story, I'm thinking maybe the good Lord put me on that street in Cedar Ridge for a reason. I don't believe in fate. Don't have to. Just have to believe that two people working together got better odds than one standing alone." Mara wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, a gesture more angry than sad. "I won't have you martyring yourself for my cause. No martyring involved. Man's got a right to stand against wrongdoing when he sees it. Besides," he added with dry humor, "winter's coming on. Could use a project to keep busy." That startled a laugh from her, short, surprised, but genuine. "Rescuing captive women is your idea of a winter hobby? Better than whittling or drinking myself stupid like some do." They sat in companionable silence after that, each lost in thought. The fire burned lower, casting longer shadows. Finally, Mara rose, collecting the darning basket. "Jed," she said, using his given name for the first time, "I want you to know, whatever happens, these days here, they've been the first peace I've known in years. That's already more than I had right to hope for." He nodded, understanding. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we start planning." She moved toward the bed, paused. "Do you really think it's possible? Getting Eliza free? I think a woman who threw hot coffee in Garrett Walsh's face and survived to tell about it can do just about anything she sets her mind to. Question is whether she's ready to try again." Mara straightened, and for a moment he saw not the wary, wounded creature who'd stood on that auction platform, but something else, steel forged in fire, bent but not broken. "I'm ready," she said simply, and Jed believed her. The cabin settled into nighttime quiet, but the air hummed with new purpose. Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall, soft and silent, covering the harsh edges of the world in pristine white. Change was coming to the mountain, and to the lives of those who sheltered there. The snow had been falling steadily for 2 days when they heard the horses. Jed was splitting wood behind the cabin while Mara worked inside, preserving the last of the autumn berries. The rhythmic thud of his axe masked the approaching hoofbeats until they were nearly at the clearing. 3 riders emerged from the tree line, a federal marshal by his badge and bearing, flanked by 2 deputies. The marshal, a lean man with steel-gray whiskers and calculating eyes, remained mounted while his men dismounted, hands resting casual-like on their sidearms. "Jed Halvorsen," the marshal called out. Jed buried his axe in the chopping block with deliberate calm. "That's me. Something I can help you with, Marshal. Brennan, Federal Marshal Roy Brennan." He produced a folded document from his coat. "I'm here on official business regarding a woman believed to be in your custody. Goes by the name Mara, no surname given." The cabin door opened, and Mara stepped onto the porch. She'd heard the horses too, had time to compose herself. Her chin lifted with that familiar defiance, though Jed noticed her hands trembled slightly at her sides. "I'm Mara," she said clearly. "No custody involved. I'm here of my own choosing." Brennan's eyes took in her appearance, the healing bruises still visible at her wrists, the short-cropped hair, the distinctive eyes. "Ma'am, I have papers here claiming you're bound by legal contract to one Garrett Walsh of the Double Bar Ranch. Says you abandoned your position and stole property besides." "What property?" Jed moved closer to the porch, positioning himself between Mara and the lawmen. "Personal effects valued at $50, according to Mr. Walsh. A silver hairbrush, some jewelry, clothing items." Brennan's tone suggested he found the claims as dubious as they sounded. "More concerning is the breach of contract. The lady signed papers." "Under duress," Mara said sharply. "To pay a debt I had no part in creating." "That may be, ma'am. But the law is the law. Contracts legal, witnessed, and filed proper. Mr. Walsh is within his rights to demand your return." One of the deputies, a younger man with nervous eyes, shifted uncomfortably. The other, older and harder-faced, kept his hand near his gun and his gaze on Jed. "Show me these papers," Jed said. Brennan dismounted, approaching slowly. Up close, Jed could see the weariness in his face, the look of a man who'd enforced too many laws he didn't agree with. He handed over the documents. Jed read carefully, Mara looking over his shoulder. The contract was indeed legal, technically. It bound her to 7 years of service in exchange for her father's debts, with clauses that made leaving before the term's end punishable by law. "This is slavery by another name," Jed said flatly. "Maybe so," Brennan agreed quietly. "But it's legal slavery. Debt bondage is still recognized by territorial law. And the theft charges? Those items were gifts," Mara said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Given to me by Mrs. Walsh before she died? I can prove it. There are letters." "Where are these letters?" Brennan asked. "At the ranch, in my room, if they haven't been destroyed." The marshal sighed, removing his hat to run a hand through thinning hair. "Look, folks, I don't like this any more than you do. But I've got orders. Either the lady comes back willingly to sort this out, or I have to arrest her." "There's another option," Mara said suddenly. She moved past Jed, descending the porch steps to face Brennan directly. "I want to make a statement, official for your records, about what really happened at the Double Bar." Brennan hesitated. "Ma'am, that's not really. You're federal law, aren't you? Sworn to uphold justice, not just territorial contracts." Her mismatched eyes blazed with purpose. "Then hear me out, all of it. Then decide if you still want to drag me back to that man." The younger deputy spoke up. "Marshal, maybe we should—" "Quiet, Morrison." Brennan studied Mara for a long moment. "All right, let's hear it. Inside, out of this snow. Morrison, you'll take notes. Beck, watch the horses." They gathered in the cabin, the space suddenly feeling cramped with 4 people. Morrison produced a notebook and pencil while Brennan took a seat at the table. Jed stood by the fireplace, ready to intervene if needed. Mara remained standing, her back straight as she began her testimony. She spoke clearly, without dramatics, laying out 2 years of escalating abuse. The unpaid labor, the withheld meals, the strikes that became beatings. She told of other women on the ranch, bound by similar contracts, living in fear. She named names, foremen who carried out Walsh's orders, visitors who'd witnessed incidents, even the doctor who'd been called to tend injuries but warned to stay quiet. When she reached the part about Eliza, her voice finally cracked. "My sister is 17 years old, Marshal. He keeps her as insurance against my speaking out, tells everyone she's simple, unable to care for herself. But I've seen the bruises, heard the rumors among the ranch hands about what happens to young women who can't defend themselves. Morrison's pencil had stopped moving. His face had gone pale as the testimony continued. Even Brennan looked shaken. "These are serious accusations," the marshal said when she finished. "Can anyone corroborate this?" "Sarah Morrison could have," Mara said quietly. "She was the cook, saw everything, tried to help when she could, but she died last winter. Pneumonia, they said, though she was healthy as a horse in autumn." The younger deputy made a sound in his throat. Brennan shot him a look. "There's Jacob Henley," Mara continued. "He was a hand at the ranch, quit in disgust. Last I heard, he was working the Carlson spread, about 40 miles south. And Dr. Elias Carr in Cedar Ridge. He treated my injuries more than once. He might talk if pressed." Brennan was quiet for a long moment, staring at the notes Morrison had taken. Finally, he looked up at Jed. "You were in town when she was sold?" "I was. Like livestock at auction. Hood over her head so folks couldn't see her face. Howard Briggs ran it, had papers he claimed were legal." "Briggs." Brennan's mouth twisted. "That explains a few things. Man's been skirting the law for years." "So, what happens now?" Jed asked. The marshal stood slowly, his decision weighing on him visibly. "Officially, I came here to retrieve a runaway debtor. That's what my report will say." He paused, meeting Mara's eyes. "But I found no such person. Just Mr. Halverson and his wife, lawfully married and minding their own business." "Marshal," Morrison started. "You get any of that statement in your notes, Deputy?" Morrison looked at his notebook, then deliberately tore out the pages, crumpling them into a ball. "What statement, sir?" "That's what I thought." Brennan moved toward the door, then turned back. "Ma'am, a word of advice. Walsh has influence, but it's not unlimited. A married woman has protections a single one don't, legal protections that even he can't override easily." The implication hung in the air like smoke. "As for your sister," Brennan continued, "that's trickier, but I'll be passing by the double bar on my way back. Might be I'll stop in, make some inquiries about the welfare of young women in the household. Federal badge carries weight, even with men like Walsh." "Thank you," Mara whispered. "Don't thank me. I'm just doing my job, upholding the law." His expression hardened. "All the laws, including the ones that protect the vulnerable. Walsh seems to have forgotten that." They filed out, Morrison avoiding eye contact, Beck curious but silent. Brennan paused at his horse, looking back at Jed. "You know he won't let this go. Legal or not, he'll come at you another way." "I figured as much. Watch your back, Halverson. Both of you." He mounted up, touched his hat brim to Mara. "Ma'am." They watched the lawmen disappear into the falling snow, their tracks filling in almost immediately. When they were gone, Mara sank into a chair, shaking now that the immediate danger had passed. "Married," she said faintly. He said married. Jed knelt beside her chair. "It's just words on paper if that's all you want it to be. But Brennan's right. It would protect you legally, make it harder for Walsh to claim any ownership." She looked at him with those striking eyes, snow light from the window making them seem almost luminous. "You do that? Bind yourself to a woman you barely know?" "I know enough. Know you're brave and strong and deserve better than what life's handed you. Know you make a fine pot of coffee and don't complain when the roof leaks. Seems like enough foundation as any." A laugh escaped her, slightly hysterical. "That's your proposal? I make good coffee? Well, you also darned my socks without being asked. Man could do worse." She sobered, studying his face. "This is real, isn't it? Not just, I'm not dreaming this kindness. Real as the snow outside." He took her hand carefully, felt the calluses and strength there. "What do you say, Mara? Want to give Garrett Walsh the surprise of his life?" For the third time since he'd known her, she smiled. This time it reached her eyes, both brown and green sparkling with something that might have been hope. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I'll marry you, Jed Halverson, and may God help us both." Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering their small cabin in a blanket of white. But inside, by the warm fire, two people who'd found each other at their lowest points began to build something new. A partnership forged in necessity but tempered with growing trust. Walsh would come. They both knew it. But when he did, he'd find not a lone woman he could intimidate, but something far more dangerous. Two people willing to stand together against whatever storm might blow their way. Marshal Brennan sat across from them in the cabin, his notebook open on the rough table. Morrison had stepped outside to keep watch while the serious conversation unfolded. The fire crackled in the hearth, providing the only sound for several long moments. "Let me be plain with you both," Brennan began, his weathered face grave. "I've looked into Garrett Walsh since our last meeting. Man's got connections running all the way to the territorial governor. What I'm about to suggest, it's walking a thin line." "We're listening," Jed said, his arm resting protective-like on the back of Mara's chair. "Walsh operates just inside the law. These debt contracts, they're legal but barely. Thing is, they only hold if the person's unmarried. A husband assumes the wife's debts, but he also assumes her rights. Walsh can't force a married woman back into service." "You mentioned that before," Mara said carefully. "But surely he'd challenge any marriage that happened after I left." Brennan pulled out a document. "That's where this comes in. Marriage certificate dated 3 months ago, before you supposedly abandoned your contract." Jed leaned forward. "That's fraud." "That's protection," Brennan corrected. "I know a judge in Silver City. Sympathetic to women in bad situations. He's willing to backdate this, make it all legal and proper, but only if you're both willing." The weight of the decision settled over them. Mara's hands twisted in her lap, and Jed could see her mind working through the implications. "What about Eliza?" she asked. "This protects me, but she's still trapped." Brennan's expression darkened. "I made those inquiries I promised. Your sister, she's not well, ma'am. Not hurt physical-like, least not that I could see, but she's scared deep. Wouldn't hardly speak to me, kept looking over her shoulder like Walsh might appear any second." Mara's knuckles went white. "He's broken her spirit." "Maybe, but broken things can mend given time and safety." The marshal leaned back. "Here's the thing. If you're legally married and settled, you could petition for guardianship of your sister. Blood relation, stable home, husband with property. Judge might look favorable on that." "Might isn't will," Jed pointed out. "No, it's not, but it's better odds than you got now." They sat in silence, each wrestling with the enormity of what was being proposed. Outside, Morrison's boots crunched in the snow as he paced. "There's something else," Brennan added reluctantly. "Walsh is already spreading stories. Says Mara here bewitched you, Halverson. Claims those different colored eyes are proof of devilry, that she's got you under some spell." Jed snorted. "Man's desperate if he's resorting to witchcraft tales." "Desperate men do dangerous things," Brennan warned. "He's also putting out word that she stole more than household goods. Now he's claiming she took money, important papers, trying to paint her as a common thief." "All lies," Mara said flatly. "Course they are, but lies repeated often enough start sounding like truth. That's why you need legal protection, and fast." Mara turned to Jed, those mismatched eyes searching his face. "This is too much to ask of you. A false marriage, taking on my troubles, my sister—" "Who said anything about false?" Jed interrupted quietly. Both Brennan and Mara stared at him. "Papers might be backdated, but the marriage doesn't have to be false." He met Mara's gaze steadily. "I've lived alone 6 years, told myself I was content. But these past weeks, house feels like a home again. Can't say I love you, don't know you well enough for that yet. But I respect you, enjoy your company, and I'd be proud to call you wife. Rest can come with time." Mara's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "Jed Halvorson, you might be the best man I've ever known." "That's a low bar, given your experiences," he said with dry humor. "But I'll take it." Brennan cleared his throat. "So? Do I tell Judge Hartwell to prepare the papers?" Mara reached across the table, taking Jed's calloused hand in hers. "Yes, God help us, yes." The marshal nodded, satisfaction and worry warring on his face. "I'll ride out today, be back within the week. In the meantime, you two need to prepare. Walsh won't take this quiet. When he finds out, he'll come at you hard." "What do you suggest?" Jed asked. "Make this place defensible. Stock up on supplies in case you get snowed in or besieged. Reach out to any friends you got. Let them know trouble might be coming. And document everything. Any threats, any attacks, any harassment. Build a case that even his political friends can't ignore. Brennan stood, gathering his papers. One more thing. That letter from Mrs. Walsh that Mara mentioned. The one about the gifts. Might be worth trying to get that. Could undermine his theft claims. It's in my old room at the ranch, Mara said. Hidden under a loose floorboard with other things. Letters from Eliza, some money I saved. But there's no way to retrieve them. Maybe, maybe not. Brennan moved to the door. I've got a man inside the double bar. One of the hands who's been feeding me information. Might be he could help if the price was right. How much? Jed asked. $50 ought to do it. Man's looking to quit anyway. Head for California. This would give him traveling money. Jed didn't hesitate. I'll get it. They followed Brennan outside, where Morrison waited with the horses. The younger deputy looked relieved to see them, clearly uncomfortable with the whole situation. Marshal, he said. Riders coming. 3 of them, from the east. Brennan squinted through the falling snow. Can you make them out? Not yet, but they're riding hard. Could be anyone, Jed said, but his hand moved to the rifle propped by the door. They waited, tension thick as the mountain air. Finally, the riders emerged from the tree line. Not Walsh's men, but trappers Jed recognized. Old Tom Buchanan and his sons, their faces grim under frost-covered beards. Halvorsen, Tom called out. Thank the Lord you're here. We got trouble. What kind of trouble? Tom dismounted, his weathered face more serious than Jed had ever seen it. That rancher, Walsh. He's hired himself a group of regulators, professional gun hands. Word is they're coming up here to retrieve what he claims is his property. When? Brennan demanded. Soon. Maybe tomorrow. Day after at most. They're gathering in Cedar Ridge now. One of Tom's sons spoke up. Pa wanted to warn you, on account of what you did for us that winter when we were snowed in. But Jed, these aren't local toughs. These are killers. Maybe you ought to run, Jed finished. Not happening. Mara stepped forward. How many? 8, maybe 10, Tom replied, then noticed her properly for the first time. His eyes widened at her memorable features, but he just touched his hat politely. Ma'am, this changes things, Brennan said quietly. Regulators means violence. I can't sanction. You don't have to sanction anything, Jed cut him off. Man's got a right to defend his home. Within limits. You kill someone, even in self-defense, there'll be inquiries, trials. Walsh has lawyers who'll twist things. Then we'd best make sure we're on the right side of the law, Mara said calmly. She turned to Tom. These regulators, they have legal authority? No, ma'am. They're just hired guns with a fancy name. Then they're trespassers if they come on private property. She looked at Brennan. That's still the law, isn't it? A man can defend against trespassers? Brennan sighed. It is, but it won't be that simple. It never is, Jed agreed. Tom, I'm grateful for the warning. You and your boys best get home before this weather gets worse. Tom hesitated. We could stay. Help out. You helped us. And I appreciate that. But this isn't your fight. Got wives and young ones to think of. The old trapper nodded reluctantly. If you change your mind, light a signal fire on Eagle's Peak. We'll see it and come running. After they left, Brennan prepared to depart as well. I'll get those papers drawn up quick as I can. Try to be back before Walsh makes his move, but if I'm not, we'll handle it, Jed said firmly. Brennan looked between them, the mountain man who'd chosen isolation and the woman marked by defiance, and shook his head. God be with you both. You're going to need him. When the lawmen had gone, Jed and Mara stood alone in the swirling snow. The cabin looked smaller somehow, more vulnerable against the vast wilderness and approaching threat. Are you afraid? Mara asked quietly. Be foolish not to be, but fear's just another thing to manage, like cold or hunger. She slipped her hand into his, their fingers intertwining naturally. When I was on that platform in town, hooded and bound, I thought my life was over. Thought I'd never be anything more than property again. And now? Now I'm about to become Mara Halvorsen, wife of a mountain man too stubborn to back down from a fight. A fierce smile crossed her face. Let Walsh come. He'll learn what happens when you corner wounded animals. They show their claws. Jed squeezed her hand, feeling the strength there. Whatever storm was approaching, they'd weather it together. The marriage might be starting as a legal fiction, but something real was growing between them. Respect, partnership, and maybe the first stirrings of something deeper. "Come on," he said. "Let's get ready. We've got a home to defend." They went inside together, leaving the empty yard to the falling snow. Soon enough, it would be trampled by horses and men. Violence would stain the pristine white. But for now, there was work to do and plans to make. The mountain held its breath, waiting for the storm to break. The night came on black as pitch, clouds obscuring even the stars. Jed had doused all lamps save one turned low, making the cabin a dark shape against darker mountains. He crouched by the window, rifle ready, while Mara took position by the back door with the shotgun. They'd been waiting 3 hours when the horses came. Not the thundering approach of overconfident men, but the careful progress of those who knew their business. Jed counted hoofbeats. 8, maybe 9 riders. They stopped just beyond the clearing, and he could hear the creak of leather as men dismounted. "Halverson!" The voice boomed across the darkness. Garrett Walsh himself, not trusting this to hired hands alone. "I know you're in there with my property. Send her out, and we'll leave peaceful-like." Jed didn't respond. Let them wonder. Let them worry about what waited in the darkness. "Don't be a fool, man. I've got legal papers. That woman belongs to me, bought and paid for. You're harboring a fugitive and a thief." From her position, Mara chambered around in the shotgun. The sound carried clear in the still air. Walsh's voice hardened. "So be it. Boys, remember, I want the woman alive. The man's expendable." They came from 3 directions at once. Jed admired the tactics, even as he squeezed off his first shot. A man cried out, spinning back into darkness. The others dove for cover, returning fire that splintered wood around the window frame. "Kitchen!" Jed barked, and Mara moved, keeping low. Glass shattered inward as someone put a bullet through the back window. She fired the shotgun, was rewarded with cursing and scrambling boots. The initial rush had failed, but now came the real test. These weren't town thugs. They were professionals who knew how to root out defenders. Jed heard them spreading out, looking for blind spots, testing approaches. A torch arced through the air, landing on the roof. Then another. "Come out or burn out," Walsh shouted. "Your choice." Jed had expected this. He'd soaked the roof earlier with buckets of water that now formed a layer of ice. The torches hissed and died. But more would come. "Jed!" Mara's warning came just as the front door exploded inward. 2 men rushed through. Jed shot the first center mass, sending him sprawling. The second got off a shot that took Jed's hat off before Mara's shotgun blast caught him from the side. But it was a feint. The real attack came from the window. A man diving through, rolling, coming up with gun drawn. Jed turned too slow, knew he wouldn't make it. The shot came from behind him. The attacker jerked, stumbled, fell. Mara stood there with his own pistol, taken from the cabinet where they'd prepared weapons. "Behind you!" she shouted. Jed spun, fired through the broken door at shapes moving in the darkness. Someone screamed. Return fire forced them both behind the overturned table they'd prepared as cover. "How many down?" Mara asked, reloading with steady hands. 3, maybe 4. "But Walsh has more coming." As if to prove his point, a voice called from outside, but not from where they expected. "The woman comes with us, Halverson. You're outnumbered and surrounded. No shame in living to fight another day." "That's close enough," Jed called back. "Next man through that door dies." Big talk for a man low on ammunition. It was partly true. They'd prepared well, but not for a siege. Jed figured maybe 20 rounds left between all weapons. Had to make them count. "I've got something to say," Mara suddenly called out. "Walsh, I know you're out there listening." Silence then. "Speak your piece, witch." "I'm no witch, just a woman who wouldn't kneel to a coward. But let's talk about what I am. I'm someone who knows where you keep your real books. The ones showing how you've been cheating your investors, skimming territorial funds." The silence stretched longer this time. "You're lying," Walsh finally responded, but uncertainty colored his voice. "The hidden drawer in your study desk, behind the false back. Letters from Senator Morrison about the railroad deal. Proof you've been selling the same land twice, once to the railroad and once to settlers. Jed glanced at her in surprise. She'd never mentioned this. Kill them both! Walsh's voice had gone shrill. Kill them now! But something had shifted. Jed heard arguing among the attackers. Not all hired guns were willing to die for an employer who might be heading for prison himself. Boss, one voice carried clear, maybe we should— I said attack! Burn them out! Do what I pay you for! More torches flew, but also more hesitation. One landed inside through the broken window. Mara kicked it back out before it could catch. Then, impossibly, Jed heard horses approaching from the west. Many horses, riding hard. What the hell? Someone outside started. It's Tom, Mara breathed, peering through a crack in the wall. Tom Buchanan and, oh God, Jed, he's brought half the mountain. They came like an avalanche. Trappers, miners, men who lived rough and understood frontier justice. Not for Jed alone, maybe, but for the principle of it. For the right of a man to defend his home against rich men who thought money made them kings. The battle turned into chaos. Walsh's hired guns, caught between the cabin and 20 angry mountain men, broke and ran. Some made it to horses, others surrendered on the spot. Where's Walsh? Tom Buchanan's voice boomed. Where's that yellow-bellied snake? In the confusion, Jed and Mara emerged from the cabin. She still held the shotgun. He kept his rifle ready. Bodies lay in the snow, some moving, some still. The yard looked like a battlefield. There! Someone shouted. He's making for the trees! Garrett Walsh had abandoned his men, spurring his horse toward the forest. But Mara was already moving. She grabbed a rifle from a fallen regulator, raised it to her shoulder, and fired. The shot took Walsh's horse in the haunch. The animal screamed, stumbled, sent Walsh flying into a snowbank. He struggled up, tried to run, but Tom's sons were on him, bearing him down. They dragged him back to the cabin, his fine clothes torn and soiled, his face twisted with rage and fear. When he saw Mara standing tall in the firelight, those different-colored eyes blazing with triumph, he spat at her feet. Witch! Devil woman! You've bedeviled them all! No magic needed, she said calmly. Just truth. Those books I mentioned? I took more than household goods when I left, Mr. Walsh. I took evidence, letters, proof of your crimes. His face went white. You couldn't have. You burned the copies I left for you to find. The originals are safe. She stepped closer. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to write a letter freeing Eliza from any obligation. You're going to sign papers saying I owe you nothing. And then you're going to leave this territory and never come back. You can't force me. Jed stepped forward, rifle casual in his hands. Look around, Walsh. You're on my land, brought violence to my home. These men are witnesses. I could shoot you right now, and every court in the territory would call it justified. Walsh looked at the grim faces surrounding him. Men who'd seen too much injustice to tolerate more. His shoulders sagged in defeat. There's paper in the cabin, Mara said. You'll write it all out, nice and legal. Tom, would you and your sons witness? Be our pleasure, ma'am. They made Walsh write it by lamplight, his hands shaking but his words clear. Freedom for Eliza. Release from all debts and obligations for Mara. An admission that items claimed stolen were freely given gifts. When it was done, witnessed and sealed, Mara held the paper like it was gold. My sister. You'll send her here, safe and unharmed. She'll be put on a stage tomorrow, Walsh muttered. Tom, Jed said, might be some of your boys could ride along to Cedar Ridge. Make sure Mr. Walsh keeps his word. Already planning on it. They hauled Walsh to his feet. His hired guns were already gone, fled into the night or held for the marshal. Tom's sons would take him to town, make sure he got on a stage heading far from the territory. As they prepared to leave, Walsh turned back one last time. You think you've won? You think this ends it? I have friends, influence. You had those things, Mara corrected. But when word gets out about those books, about the fraud, your friends will distance themselves quick. Power built on lies crumbles fast when truth comes calling. They watched him driven away. A broken man who'd thought money could buy him the right to own another human soul. The mountain men lingered, checking the wounded, helping clean up the worst of the damage. Tom Buchanan approached Jed and Mara where they stood together on the porch. Hell of a fight. You two all right? We're alive, Jed said simply. Thanks to you and the boys. Saw your signal fire on Eagle's Peak. Figured you wouldn't light it unless things were desperate. Tom grinned. Besides, been too long since we had a good scrap. Walsh had this coming for years. As dawn broke gray and cold over the mountains, the last of the men departed. Jed and Mara stood alone in their shot-up yard, surrounded by the evidence of violence, but also of community, of people willing to stand for what was right. It's over, Mara said wonderingly. It's really over. This part is, Jed agreed. Still gotta get your sister safe. Still gotta rebuild what they broke. Still got... She silenced him with a kiss, fierce and grateful and full of promise. When they parted, both were breathless. Eliza will be here soon, she said. We'll be a family. A strange one, maybe, but a family. Jed pulled her close, looking out over the mountains he'd called home for 6 solitary years. No longer solitary, no longer hiding from life. Sometimes the best things came from the worst circumstances. Let's get inside, he said. See what we can salvage for breakfast. Fighting evil works up an appetite. She laughed, free and unguarded for the first time since he'd known her. Together they entered their battered but unbroken home, ready to face whatever came next. The mountains stood eternal around them, having witnessed another chapter in the long story of human courage against tyranny. And in a small cabin on a high ridge, 2 people who'd found each other in darkness began to build something bright and new. The moon hung low and cold as Jed and Mara rode through the forest, their horses' breath forming clouds in the frigid air. 3 days had passed since the battle at the cabin, 3 days of waiting for word about Eliza. When none came, they knew something had gone wrong. Tom Buchanan's son had ridden back with troubling news. Walsh had been put on the stage as promised, but he'd sent word to his foreman before leaving. The Double Bar Ranch was locked down tight, no one in or out without permission from the new man in charge. A hard case named Curtis Bramwell. He's holding her prisoner, Mara had said, her face stone, using her as one last way to hurt me. Now they rode toward the ranch under cover of darkness, just the 2 of them. Tom had offered men, but Jed knew a small group moved quieter than a large one. This required stealth, not force. There, Mara whispered, pointing through the trees. The double bar sprawled below them in a valley, lamplight glowing in several windows. Even at this distance, they could see men patrolling, rifles carried ready. They're expecting us, Jed observed. Bramwell knows I'll come for her. Mara's jaw tightened. He's counting on it. They tied the horses well back from the ranch and proceeded on foot. Mara led, knowing every building, every fence line. She'd lived here 2 years, had memorized escape routes she'd never gotten to use. The main house is there, she breathed in his ear. Eliza's room was in the servants' wing, but if they're holding her close, she'll be in the house itself, probably upstairs, harder to escape from. They circled wide, avoiding the patrols. Jed admired how quietly Mara moved. All those years of trying to become invisible had taught her well. They reached the back of the property where a small garden shed stood against the fence. Wait here, Mara said. There's someone I need to find. Before Jed could protest, she melted into the shadows. He crouched behind the shed, rifle ready, counting heartbeats until she returned. With her came a slight figure, a Mexican woman, older, wearing servant's clothes. Rosa, Mara whispered by way of introduction. She helped me before. She'll help us now. Rosa's weathered face was grim. The little one, she is scared, Senora. They keep her locked in Mr. Walsh's old study. That Bramwell, he tells her you abandoned her, that you're dead. She cries every night. Mara's hands clenched. How many men inside? 4, maybe 5. Most are in the bunkhouse or patrolling. Bramwell thinks you'll come charging in like last time. Can you get us inside? Rosa nodded. The kitchen door. I go out to dump washwater every night at this time. But Senora, if they catch us... They won't, Jed said firmly. You've risked enough. Just get us in, then get yourself somewhere safe. They followed Rosa across the dark yard, staying low. True to her word, the kitchen door stood slightly open. Inside, the house was quiet, except for voices from somewhere toward the front. Men playing cards, by the sound of it. Rosa pointed up the servants' stairs. 2nd floor, 3rd door on the right. That's the study. She pressed something into Mara's hand. A key. from when I cleaned. Be careful, Senora. Mara hugged her quickly. Then she and Jed climbed the narrow stairs. The hallway above was dimly lit by a single lamp. They could hear the guards below more clearly now, laughing over their game. At the study door, Mara's hand shook as she fitted the key. It turned with a soft click. Inside, a figure huddled on a small cot near the window, illuminated by moonlight. "Eliza?" Mara breathed. The girl's head snapped up. Even in the poor light, the family resemblance was clear. The same strong features, though softer on Eliza, unmarked by hardship. Her eyes were both brown, wide with shock. "Mara?" Disbelief, then joy, then terror. "No, you can't be here. They said you were dead. Bramwell will—" Mara crossed the room in 2 strides, pulling her sister into a fierce embrace. "Shh, little bird. I'm here. We're getting you out." "We can't. There are men everywhere. And he said, Bramwell said if you came, he'd—" Eliza was crying now, clinging to her sister. "Listen to me," Mara said firmly, holding Eliza's face in her hands. "This is Jed, my husband. We're taking you home, but you need to be brave just for a little while. Can you do that?" Eliza looked at Jed, taking in his solid presence, the rifle in his hands. Some of her panic eased. "You married?" "It's a long story. Right now we need to move. Can you walk?" The girl nodded, wiping her tears. She was wearing only a thin nightdress, so Mara pulled off her own coat, wrapping it around her sister. They made it to the hallway before their luck ran out. Well. Curtis Bramwell stood at the top of the main stairs, pistol drawn. He was a lean man with dead eyes and a scar that pulled his mouth into a permanent sneer. "Mrs. Walsh said you'd come. Soft-hearted women are so predictable." "Let us pass, Bramwell," Jed said evenly. "The girl's done nothing wrong." "Neither have I. Just following the last orders of my employer. Keep the girl safe until her sister comes to collect her." His smile was cold. "Course, he also said to make sure neither of you leaves here breathing." "Walsh is gone," Mara said. "You don't have to do this." "Maybe not, but he paid in advance, and I'm a man who honors his contracts." He raised the pistol. "Drop the rifle, mountain man." Jed hesitated, calculating angles, distances. Too far to rush him, no cover to speak of. "I said drop it." A shot rang out. For a moment Jed thought he'd been hit. Then he saw Bramwell stagger, looking down at the spreading red on his shirt. Behind him on the stairs stood Rosa, an old Navy Colt smoking in her hands. 20 years I work in this house," she said quietly. 20 years I watch evil men do evil things. No more." Bramwell tried to turn, to shoot, but his strength was failing. He tumbled down the stairs, the pistol clattering away. Shouts erupted from below. The card game was over. "This way!" Mara grabbed Eliza's hand, pulling her toward the servants' stairs. Jed brought up the rear, ready to fire at anyone who appeared. They clattered down, burst through the kitchen just as men poured in from the front rooms. "Run!" Jed turned, fired twice to make them duck, then followed the women into the yard. More shouts. Lanterns flared to life. The whole ranch was waking up. They ran for the garden, Eliza stumbling in her bare feet. Mara half carried her, desperation lending strength. Behind them, gunfire erupted. Wild shots in the darkness. "The horses!" Jed urged them on, shooting back when he could. They crashed through the underbrush, branches tearing at clothes and skin. Eliza was sobbing with fear and pain, but she kept moving. The horses waited where they'd left them, stamping nervously at the commotion. Jed boosted Eliza up behind Mara, then swung onto his own mount. "Ride!" he shouted. "Don't stop!" They spurred into the forest as riders burst from the ranch behind them. The chase was on, but Jed knew these mountains, these trails. He led them up paths no lowland horse could follow fast, through streams to break their scent, over ridges where moonlight barely penetrated. Gradually, the sounds of pursuit fell behind. They slowed, letting the horses breathe. Eliza clung to Mara, shaking with cold and reaction. "Is it over?" she whispered. "Are we safe?" "We're safe, little bird," Mara assured her, though she looked to Jed for confirmation. He listened to the night sounds, just wind and distant owls. "We lost them, but we should keep moving, put more distance between us." They rode on at an easier pace. Eliza began to droop, exhaustion overtaking fear. Mara held her steady, murmuring comfort. "Rosa," Eliza said suddenly. "What will happen to Rosa?" "She's tougher than she looks," Mara said, "and she just removed their leader. The other servants will protect her. Say Bramwell was shot by an intruder. Without Walsh or Bramwell, that ranch will fall apart quick." Dawn was painting the peaks pink when they finally saw the cabin. Smoke rose from the chimney. Tom Buchanan had posted his son there to keep watch and maintain the fire. Young Pete Buchanan emerged, rifle lowered when he recognized them. "Thank the Lord. We were starting to worry. Help me get her inside," Mara said. Eliza was barely conscious, worn out by terror and flight. They carried her in, laid her on the bed. Mara fussed over her, warming water for washing, finding clean clothes, preparing food. Jed watched from the doorway, seeing a side of his wife he hadn't glimpsed before. Tender, maternal, fierce in her protectiveness. When Eliza was clean, fed, and tucked under warm blankets, she caught Mara's hand. "I thought you forgot me," she whispered. "They said such terrible things." "Never," Mara said fiercely. "You're my sister, my blood. I'd walk through fire for you." "And Jed?" Eliza's eyes found him. "He's really your husband." "He is. The best man I've ever known." Mara's eyes met Jed's across the room, warm with gratitude and something deeper. "He helped save us both." Eliza smiled sleepily. "Then I'm glad. You deserve to be happy." She drifted off, finally safe. Mara sat beside her for a long moment, just watching her breathe. Then she rose, crossed to where Jed stood. "Thank you," she said simply. "For everything." "We're family now," he replied. "All of us. Family takes care of each other." She kissed him then, soft and sweet. When they parted, tears tracked down her cheeks, but they were tears of relief, of joy. Outside, the sun climbed higher, burning off the morning mist. Inside the small cabin, 3 souls who'd been separated by cruelty were united by courage. It wasn't the end of all troubles. There would be adjustments, healing, learning to live together. But it was a beginning. Jed looked at the 2 sisters, one sleeping peacefully, the other keeping watch, and felt something he hadn't experienced in 6 long years, complete. His lonely mountain had become a home again, filled with purpose and the promise of better days ahead. Whatever challenges came next, they'd face them together. The empty years were over. Life, real life, had begun again. Spring came early to the mountains that year, melting snow revealing green shoots, pushing through dark earth. The cabin had grown since winter. Jed and Tom Buchanan's boys had added a second room for Eliza, giving the sisters privacy while maintaining the family closeness they both needed. 3 months had passed since the night they'd brought Eliza home. 3 months of healing, of learning to live without fear. The girl who'd arrived terrified and broken had begun to bloom, her gentle nature emerging as she discovered what safety felt like. On this particular morning, Jed stood outside the cabin, watching Mara work in their new garden. She'd insisted on planting as soon as the ground thawed, vegetables, herbs, even some flowers for beauty's sake. The sun caught the silver threads in her auburn hair, made her mismatched eyes sparkle when she looked up at him. "Going to help or just stand there admiring?" she called, teasing. "Man's got a right to admire his wife," Jed replied, moving to join her. They worked side by side in comfortable silence, hands in the earth, building something that would last. Inside, they could hear Eliza humming as she prepared the midday meal, another sign of her recovery. The girl rarely sang when she first arrived. "Rider's coming," Mara said suddenly, shading her eyes to peer down the trail. Jed straightened, automatically checking the rifle propped against the fence. Old habits died hard, but as the riders drew closer, he relaxed. "It's Marshal Brennan. Got someone with him." Brennan dismounted at the gate, touching his hat to Mara. With him was a well-dressed man carrying a leather portfolio, a lawyer by the look of him. "Mrs. Halvorson, Jed," Brennan greeted. "This is Mr. Carlton from Denver. He's got some news might interest you." Carlton was a thin man with intelligent eyes behind wire spectacles. "Ma'am, I represent a group of investors who were misled by Garrett Walsh's land schemes. Thanks to certain documents that came to light," he glanced meaningfully at Mara, "we've been able to recover significant assets." "The papers I took," Mara said quietly. Indeed, your foresight in preserving evidence has helped dozens of families recover their losses. As such, the investors have authorized me to deliver this. He produced an envelope. A reward, you might say, for services rendered to the cause of justice. Mara opened it, gasped. Jed, this is $5,000. There's more, Carlton continued. The Double Bar Ranch has been seized for debt. The investors are selling it off in parcels. They've authorized me to offer you first choice of any section, at a very reasonable price. We don't need Walsh's land, Jed said firmly. Perhaps not, Carlton agreed. But there's a particular parcel, 40 acres on the western border, good water, sheltered valley, currently occupied by several Mexican families who work the ranch. They're afraid they'll be driven off when new owners come. Mara's eyes lit up. Rosa's family. Among others, yes. Purchase that section. You could ensure they keep their homes. Jed and Mara exchanged glances, using Walsh's own money to protect the people he'd oppressed. There was justice in that. We'll take it, Mara decided. Draw up the papers. After the legal talk concluded, Brennan lingered. There's one more thing. Walsh himself. He died 2 weeks ago, shot in a gambling dispute in Kansas. Seems his luck ran out when he lost his power. Mara absorbed this news quietly. I thought I'd feel something, satisfaction maybe. But there's nothing. He's just gone. That's healing, Brennan observed. When your enemies become too small to matter anymore. After the men left, the family gathered for their meal. Eliza had prepared a feast, venison stew, fresh bread, early greens from the garden. She moved confidently now, no longer jumping at shadows. I've been thinking, Eliza said as they ate, about what I want to do, now that I'm free to choose. What's that, little bird? Mara asked. I want to teach, start a school for the mountain children. So many of them can't read or write. Her eyes shone with purpose. I could make a difference. That's a fine idea, Jed said warmly. We could clear a space, build a proper schoolhouse come summer. Really? Eliza's joy was radiant. You'd help? Family helps family, he said simply. That afternoon, Pastor Williams from Cedar Ridge arrived to perform a ceremony they'd been planning. Not a wedding. That had been handled by the judge months ago, papers properly filed to protect Mara legally. This was something else, a true marriage ceremony, witnessed by friends and family, celebrating a union that had grown from necessity into genuine love. Tom Buchanan and his clan arrived, along with other mountain folk who'd stood with them in their time of need. Even Samuel Morrison, the blacksmith from town, came with his wife. The cabin's yard filled with well-wishers, bringing food and music and laughter. As the sun lowered toward the peaks, Jed and Mara stood before the pastor. She wore a simple blue dress Eliza had sewn, wildflowers woven in her hair. He wore his cleanest shirt and newest boots. Nothing fancy, but they didn't need fancy. Do you, Jedediah Halverson, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? Pastor Williams intoned. To have and hold in sickness and health, for richer or poorer, as long as you both shall live? I do, Jed said, his voice strong and certain. Already did once, but I'd do it 100 times more. Soft laughter rippled through the gathering. And do you, Mara, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and hold in sickness and health, for richer or poorer, as long as you both shall live? I do, Mara said, her mismatched eyes bright with tears. With all my heart. Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you, still, husband and wife. The cheer that went up echoed off the mountains. Musicians struck up a tune, and dancing began in the yard. Even shy Eliza was coaxed into a reel with young Pete Buchanan, her laughter floating on the evening air. As darkness fell and lanterns were lit, Jed found a moment alone with his wife. They stood at the edge of the celebration, looking out over the valley below. No regrets, Mara asked softly. Not a one. You? Only that it took so long to find you. She leaned into him, fitting perfectly against his side. That day in Cedar Ridge, when you bought me like a sack of grain. Best $10 I ever spent, he interrupted, making her laugh. I thought my life was ending. Instead, it was just beginning. She looked up at him, those remarkable eyes full of love. You saved me, Jed Halverson. We saved each other, he corrected. I was just existing before you came. Now I'm living. Behind them, the party continued. A community celebrating not just a marriage, but a victory over cruelty, a triumph of human dignity. Eliza danced and laughed, free to be young. Rose's family had arrived from their secured land, adding their music to the mix. Tom Buchanan was telling stories that grew taller with each cup of cider. Look what we built, Mara marveled. From such dark beginnings. The best gardens grow in soil that's known hardship, Jed philosophized. Makes the roots go deeper, the blooms more precious. She stood on her toes to kiss him, there under the vast Montana sky with stars beginning to emerge. When they parted, both were smiling. Come on, she said, taking his hand. Our guests are calling for us to dance. They rejoined the celebration, moving together to the fiddle's tune. Around them, their chosen family clapped and cheered. The lonely cabin on the mountain had become a home filled with warmth and laughter. As the evening wound on, Jed caught sight of their reflection in the window. Himself, no longer the isolated mourner. Mara, no longer the woman with a sack over her head, deemed unworthy of love. Eliza, no longer the frightened girl held as leverage. They'd all been transformed by the alchemy of courage, kindness, and connection. The music played on, echoing across the mountains that had witnessed so much sorrow and now bore witness to joy. In the small cabin beneath the eternal peaks, 3 broken people had found wholeness in each other. They'd learned that sometimes the greatest treasures come disguised as the greatest trials, and that love, real love, could grow in the most unlikely soil. The stars wheeled overhead, ancient and constant, blessing the little family below who'd fought so hard for their happiness and won. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dreams to chase. But tonight there was music and dancing and the sweet satisfaction of a life reclaimed from the ashes of despair. Home, family, freedom, love. Simple words that held all the riches in the world for those who'd nearly lost everything. The mountain man who'd bought a rejected bride had found a treasure beyond measure, and she'd found in him the safe harbor she'd never dared hope for. Their story would be told around mountain fires for generations, a reminder that even in the darkest times, love could bloom like wildflowers in spring, stubborn and beautiful and absolutely unstoppable. Thank you for listening to this Wild West love story. Where are you enjoying this tale from? Please comment below and let's connect. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about Jed and Mara's journey. Your support means everything.